Morning, thank you for having me. With this work, we wanted to re-examine what pelvic parturition scars really indicate. For those who don't know what parturition scars are, they are osteological features of the female pelvis that have traditionally been linked to pregnancy and childbirth. But this feature may also reflect sex-related anatomy, biomechanics, age-related remodeling, and ligamentous stress. So we we wanted to challenge this traditional assumption with a multifactorial evidence-based approach. And we aim to answer these following questions. So which feature best reflect obstetric loading versus general biomechanics? Can we separate sexual dimorphic traits from historically misinterpreted obstetric ones? And how do age, weight, and pelvic morphology shape expression? Do classic marker keep a diagnostic value even in heterogeneous samples? And finally, which combination and grades of expressions of these parturition scars are the most informative? So we were quite ambitious, I have to admit, and I'll return to this question at the end with some answer, not all of them, unfortunately. So here is the distribution of the individual across the periods. And so in this case, chronology gives archaeological context, but our analytical focus is cross-sectional. So we wanted to see if this feature remain informative across different backgrounds. And I have to say that all data collection from this individual was done by one of my co-authors, Martina Carcangiu, as part of her master thesis in archaeology. And by me and her together developed the methods and carried out the statistical analysis. So first of all, we estimated stature from femur length and weight from the femur head diameter, and recorded then 13 pelvic dimension and to try to capture somatic size and obstetric diameters. Then very, very briefly, I will show you which birth parturition scars we evaluated in our samples. For each of them, we don't only evaluate it if their presence or absence, but also the degree of expression, because we found that it's most important. And using all the published methods for recording, favoring those that describe it more degrees whenever possible. So the most important one and the most famous one is the preauricular sulcus or preauricular groove. And we distinguish two main forms. There are different degrees of expression of these two main forms, but they are ligamentous versus gravidic form. So the other marks are dorsal pubic pitting, ventral pubic pitting. Then there are different grooves like the interosseous groove or margo auricularis groove, iliac tuberosity, and the pubic tubercle that can be more or less extended. And then we have two sacropelvic extensions, the SPA and the sacroauricular notch. There are two like remodeling of the margin of the sacroiliac articulation that extend to the sacrum. Okay, first of all, first results is the prevalence plot that shows a consistent sex-linked pattern. So female consistently show higher frequency in most pelvic scar markers, for example, dorsal and ventral pitting, preauricular sulcus, etc. So reflecting a greater expression of parturition-related modeling. But contrary to what we expected, in our samples, males show higher prevalence in few of those traditionally obstetric traits, in particular the extended pubic tubercle, the thickness of the iliac tuberosity, and even if not statistically significant, also the margo auricularis groove and the SPE. So the message is clear, sex linkage is strong. Comparing pelvic and somatic measurement, of course, male generally shows larger somatic dimensions, so weight, stature, and also pubic symphyx height, reflecting overall greater body size. Female exhibit larger obstetric pelvic diameters, so all the conjugates, the diameter, the pubic outlet, etc., consistent with reproductive pelvic morphology, so nothing surprising. Yet there were several measurements that overlapped indicating that while sex differences are clear in K pelvic region, not all pelvic traits that are commonly studied are strongly dimorphic, at least in our samples. So what was most interesting was trying to understand how weight and age later influenced the expression, not only the presence or absence of these markers, but the expression, so less severe and more severe. And statistics show that weight is a weak predictor across the board. In females, we have only weak positive correlation and some load-bearing pelvic areas, suggesting that weight is not a major driver of scarring. And in males, we have mixed positive and negative low correlation, so indicating that there is no consistent association between weight and scarring. So overall pattern suggests a multifactorial origin of scars, with weight contributing only minimally, because if body mass were a driving feature, a driving character of for this feature, we see a stronger linear trends. Regarding age, age performed better than weight, particularly in females, where we have several moderate positive correlation, always low, but some more positive, and suggesting a cumulative age-related remodeling or a cumulative biomechanical stress. And in males, we see a milder correlation. So age doesn't turn this feature into age marker, okay, but it modulates expression. It can mask or mimic obstetric sensitive patterns. So it's always important when one studies these markers to have a contextual reading. So what is the age of the individual? That's most important. And of course, this indicated age has a clearer relationship with scarring than weight does. Of course, I can show all the results, but just to some most important, here we try to stratify by historical period to show when if the scarring worked in the same way in all the different historical period between males and females. And most pelvic features remain remarkably stable. Only some of them, dorsal and ventral pubic picting and extended pubic tubercle, show suggestive differences across period. Yet I have to say this comparison rely on very small subsample because and that limits statistical power and inflate uncertainty. So we should avoid this diachronic crime at this point, because the signal may reflect preservation or scoring noise or composition differences rather than genuine period effects. So in order to try to answer the starting question, which pelvic feature truly reflect obstetric loading rather than general biomechanical stress? Could we answer this question? Not really, because of course we can answer partially, because we highlighted which feature cluster strongly in female. Especially we found out in another statistic that some of them appears in female only in high grades and lower grades in males, so which we could find some indication of which obstetric sensitive traits may be, but we cannot prove that because we need a direct link to childbirth events. We lack known parity individual, so we need to test this with some collection that has parity information of the individual. And can we distinguish sexually dimorphic traits from historically misinterpreted parturition scars? Yes. Many classical obstetric traits, for example, this pubic tubercle extended, or the tuberosity of the iliac bone, and the margo auricularis groove in our sample show higher frequency in males, confirming that they are not absolutely obstetric markers. Also, if you, I haven't shown you, but pointed the attention, but if you look back at a weight correlation, we see that some of them are more correlated with weight in females, so it probably has something correlated to weight and not to the obstetric traits. And so how do age, weight, and pelvic morphology influence sex expression? We could answer yes, because weight has a minimal influence on sex expression, while age is a better predictor, especially in female, reflecting this cumulative remodeling, and possibly reproductive history, but need to be tested, of course. And finally, do classic no, last two. Do classic Parturition marker maintain diagnostic value in heterogeneous archaeological samples? We have some answer because some markers works differently in different period, but we have to be cautious of these results because our subsamples, especially in the Bronze Age, were very, very small. So I will say maybe. And which combination of marker and which grades best indicate reproductive history? More or less, we can identify high information markers and combination with possible obstetric sensitivity, but we cannot confirm it without known parity individual. So the take-home message from this talk is that there are no true childbirth scars. There are pelvic traits that are sensitive to obstetric loading, but they are not diagnostic. Some markers have strong informational value only when we found them combined and expressed at high grades. So if you find more of them in the same individual, it's more probably that the individual had some birth or pregnancy in their life, but one by itself is not enough. And then the body weight and lifestyle may matter very little. Aging and sexual dimorphism matter far more. And interpretation must be contextual, multifactor, and probabilistic. And thank you for the attention.